titles, artist curator being one of them. So this is a piece, it's one of the first times where this happened. It's one of the first times. It's happened before, but it truly, I guess, crystallized in this particular exhibition. It's called Raid the Icebox, and it's by Andy Warhol, and he was working with the, what was the museum? It was the museum at RISD, and for the exhibition, he decided to install all the back rooms and all the storage that was in the museum, and to put that inside the gallery itself. You know, kind of a typical Warhol move. It's a little impish, it's a little silly, but it really pointed to something that is pretty important, which is the idea of museums as businesses, how museums are run, the institution of a museum. This work is part of what historians refer to as institutional critique. I wouldn't call it a movement, but certainly certainly an idea that emerged during, I guess, mostly in the 70s and moving forward, that really addressed the role of the museum and whether or not that role was necessarily always beneficial. And this has a lot to do with how we've switched thinking about education. Education, instead of being something that was a top-down approach, that was kind of exclusive, this is tied hand in hand with these different ways of education, different ways to approach how we bring people into a museum, how we create community, how we create interaction, who benefits from these things. Again, a lot of it has to do with globalism, which is massive. This is a show called Artist Choice. It's a series that the MoMA in New York City puts on. They started the first one in 1986. The slide that you're looking at is Trisha Donnelly's exhibition, and she was invited by the museum, as all the artists in this series are, to go through the collection, look at what's there, and pull an exhibition from that. There's a really fascinating article about this that I think it's in the New York Times, where the head curator for the MoMA was talking about what it was like for her to watch an artist curate an exhibition. And it was, as you might not be surprised, was radically different than the way that she approaches putting together an exhibition. Trisha and many other artists like her who have been invited to do these kinds of things worked without a chronology, worked without a particular goal or educational or historical thing in mind. She was more concerned with creating visual relationships and with pulling work from the collection that, in her words, felt urgent, felt like they needed to be seen. One of the really interesting things about this series is how much of the work which hasn't seen the light of day in a long time gets exposure. It's not necessarily the top hits, it's not necessarily the most blue chip famous artists, or the kind of gallery names that need to take up a lot of real estate in a museum because that's what brings in people. But as a result of that, you're getting to see a lot of this really interesting work, or work that the museum owns and that the museum itself hasn't looked at or thought about in a long time. And for the curator, that was a really interesting lesson. It's also another way to gain insight into the ideas, processes of a particular artist, to really see how they think about something. Are they going to choose work that is similar to their own work? Are they going to choose work that they think is from a particular time period that really impacted them personally? Will it be personal at all, and it's solely a visual exercise? They really allow you to get to know an artist in a different way. However, like any exhibition, the method isn't always successful. This one in particular was at the New Museum, and it was a show called Skin Fruit, curated by Jeff Koons. And the reviews for it that were published in various publications were awful. There's a good one by Roberta Smith where it's scathing. It's like she just pans the whole thing, which is, kind of like saucy to read. And the critique that the show received, which I personally think is rather valid, is that it looked more like a good auction house. It was more like a best of show than it was really an idea about anything. So whereas I just mentioned one of the interesting things that happen is that an artist will choose work that never sees the light of day, that needs more attention. Jeff's approach was the opposite. So it was like hit after hit after hit, which could be good, but maybe not at the New Museum, whose mission is to show emerging, unseen, international, who has a different mission than, say, a place like the MoMA, which is this encyclopedic institution. So it just wasn't a bad fit to begin with in terms of what he was doing and how the museum wants to be perceived. And it was talked about extensively in various reviews. That isn't to say that some of the work in it wasn't incredible. It was. But when you talk about an exhibition and curatorial practice, you're not necessarily talking about whether or not the work is good, or whether or not the work is well received, or you're talking about an idea, how the whole thing functions, how the exhibition flows and moves, the tenets of what are being talked about, how it works together, how a viewer enters and moves through the space. And that has a lot of room for wanting to show excellent work, but that isn't the entire thing that has to do with curating, which I think curators kind of get a bad rap. People think that they're just hanging stuff on a wall that they like, and when it's done well, it's actually way more complicated than that. But the artists that are here, there's a Chris O'Feely painting, a Charles Ray sculpture, and a Powell Athamer installation performance. Okay. So this last one that I'm going to show you is pretty revolutionary. It was from earlier this year, and it caused a lot of waves. It's called #SocialMedium. It was from the Fry Art Museum in Seattle, and although this has happened before in recent history, they were the first to really do it in a whole hog kind of way. So the show is crowd curated. So all the paintings that they had in their collection, people could go online and they could like them, like they like something on Facebook or whatever. And the ones that got the most likes were chosen for the show. The part that I think is really interesting and that has really gotten a lot of people talking is the fact that, and you'll see this right part of the wall, the tag for curator in the show has over 4,800 names in it because it's every single person who voted got credit as curator. Their name is posted and you can print it along the wall, as well as their comments. Wow. So talk about seriously community engaged. Now this has caused, there's a wonderful article in the Wall Street Journal about this, but this has caused, as you might imagine, lots of conversation in the art world. What does it mean that we don't need a curator? What if people are doing it? What about quality? What are they going to choose? What about peer pressure? And it's really gotten people talking about what is the value of having that much engagement with a community, or where you allow the community to take the reins on something. What is the purpose of a museum then? Does a museum then become a community center? And there's just a lot of conversation about it that I think is really fascinating and very, very current. So,
I have a question. Me too. It seems to me that
hold on a second.
are already in the museum.
Okay.
They've already had someone believe enough in them to have them there. So I guess I'm not sure why it isn't a good thing, because they're already choosing from very creative, very unusual.
Well, I mean, it's a big pool, right? So, you know, the Fry probably has a collection somewhere in the 20,000 object. So, you're right, there is some pre-vetting. At the Santa Cruz Museum, led by Nina Simon, we all know her book, she's doing an exhibition where it's about the sea. And there will be, I think, 10 or 15 different works that deal with the ocean that will be in the exhibition, and then people are allowed to bring in their own artwork. That's caused a lot of conversation. Are there any other questions?
My quick question is, when they were doing this voting online, like type of thing, did they know their name was going to be up there and comment in the exhibit?
I think that it was all pretty transparent.
It was?
Yeah.
Okay, because otherwise that would cause a lot of conversation. Legally, probably.
Sure.
Of course.
Okay, questions? All right, I'm gonna give you a little 10-minute break. And then we're going to get back and we're going to talk about the three artists. So the show, as you know, Three Graces, Polly Apfelbaum, Tony Fair, and Carrie Moyer. The Graces have been, their names have been associated with a number of different things. So starting in the same order as I mentioned their names, Aglaia, Euphrosyne, and Thalia, they've been called Beauty, Good Cheer, Festivities, Splendor, Mirth, Good Cheer, Beauty, Mirth, Abundance, Charm, Beauty, Creativity, Elegance, Mirth, and Youth, etc., etc. There isn't really a defined adjective that goes along with them, although beauty seems to be pretty consistent. So for this show, Elizabeth has chosen Beauty, Wonder, and Joy. And I think all of the artists that are in this exhibition really encompass those three adjectives. But for my money, I kind of think that each one of them corresponds to one in particular.